Hi everyone, my name is Sheng. Welcome to my channel where I help organizations and individuals think through their toughest problems. We're going through a really chaotic time right now, as if, COVID was not enough. The world economy is kind of going up and down as well, and now we have Russia invading Ukraine, right? So there is a lot of changes that are afoot. When I first heard the news on Tuesday, it felt like COVID had dropped again. It felt like March of 2020 all over again. Because I think in terms of mind maps, time itself is actually like a one-directional mind map of sorts, or decision trees, right? That, just completely expands the possibilities. And during the times of calm or order, the future is actually we feel like it's relatively certain. And it's during these times of uncertainty, that's when it could be anybody's guess. But it's precisely when crises hit, that's when we actually have to be the most calm, the most objective, or at least objective as we can, right? Especially when there's competing narratives that's happening in the world right now. So on Wednesday morning, I journaled, as I do, in order to slow down my own thinking and, just work through a structured way to how I usually approach crises, right? Understanding crises rather than being bombarded by, the torrents of news or Twitter and all these different opinions from different pundits. So what I mapped out was a hierarchy of information sources that I will be personally going through myself in the next week or two in order to better understand the situation, how we got to this particular point, and where things might actually, start happening down the line, right? But I want to share this in real time because I remember in March 2020, when I first started this channel, I felt like this confusion, this chaos in the world was causing a lot of suffering. It was causing a lot of people anxiety about, where the world is going to go. So I decided that it's probably helpful to just share with you the framework. Again, this is what this channel is all about. I'm not trying to tell you what to think so much as give you tools on how to think better in order to organize all this chaos that's happening around us, right? So let's go through it actually. So understanding emerging crises. I used a version of this actually in my COVID analysis in March 10th of 2020. So in a previous video, I'll link down below. But here, I really prioritize books over pretty much all else, right? You've got four main information sources. You've got books, documentaries, educational videos, news, as well as first-party accounts, right? So I'll go through each of these one at a time. I put books at the forefront, the highest priority, primarily because it takes a lot more effort to actually write a book and slow your thinking down. It's a lot easier to just write a 140 character tweet, a lot easier to go on CNN, NBC, Fox News, or wherever you're from, essentially, to make, a pundit remark, right? And who writes these books is really important. I always prioritize practitioners over pundits. What I mean is that practitioners often are, for example, investors or people who have, lived through policy, right? And the books I'm going through now, for example, is The World, A Brief Introduction by Richard Haas. And he was actually the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. So it's a much more reliable source than just listening to another pundit on CNN, right? I also have two more books coming. One of them is from Ray Dalio, the founder and chairman of Bridgewater Associates, one of the hedge funds. I follow him a lot. I really appreciated his book on the big debt crisis, which really, helped me understand the economy at large. But he wrote a new book called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, which I think is highly relevant for today's world. And then finally, upon recommendation from my friend Lewis out in Dublin, is Prisoners of Geography, right? So with these books, the whole point is so that I'm able to gain a contextual view of what got us here, because the past essentially, again, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, so the saying goes, right? If you're able to study some of the past, at least, we should be able to at least figure out what generally happens during, these kind of crises, but also what kind of egos, what kind of, I guess, different national goals are at stake in each of these dynamics, right? And again, why do I not listen to pundits? Well, it really comes down to the incentive structure. Here I've got skin in the game versus clickbait. Practitioners, by nature, the fact that they've put their money on the line, their careers on the line, and their reputation on the line, in their jobs first, they're practitioners first and foremost, right? And then they write books based on their knowledge. I trust these guys a lot more than pundits who essentially are, trying to get clickbait. It's just a very different monetization strategy and incentives. It's just not there. All right, so number 2 is documentaries and educational videos. So these could be historical videos that's posted on YouTube from a while ago even. I try to look for stuff that was posted a year ago rather than being completely reactionary, right? These at least will hopefully have withstood the test of time. But not only that, is not prone to pretty much like the hype that's going on. Documentaries are another version of that. And also informed friends, right? If you have friends who work in policy, if you have friends who are actually like, abroad even, who know more about the situation, definitely ping them up. They're going to be a really valuable resource. The third priority down the line in terms of information sources is first-party accounts, right? There's actually a time sequence of this. I will only really start approaching these. I mean, these are basically, speeches, for example, from the politicians themselves, the decision makers, interviews, as well as folks that are actually on the ground, right? If you have coverage of interviews from people in Ukraine or in Russia, that's actually extremely valuable. However, I would only approach first-party accounts after you've gained essentially some contextual lens from the other two of books and YouTube videos or educational documentaries, right? Or at least suspend your judgment if you're going to be watching the first-party accounts initially. And then finally, there's news. This is the last of my category. These are the broadcasts. This is Twitter, social media, including Instagram posts, right? General friends who are watching the same news as you and therefore getting the same torrent of information, right? But also reputable magazines. I actually really like The Economist for that reason, partially because it's peer-reviewed and also they welcome opposing views, right? These are the things that make it a bit more objective journalism of sorts as well. So be careful about your information sources is what I'm saying, right? So what I would gain from both the first-party accounts as well as the news, especially the news, is popular views, different perspectives, and important developments that's happening in real time, right? So once you've gotten the educated lens and historical content and been able to actually slow your thinking down, then diving into the news cesspool sometimes is actually very, very helpful because now you're able to form your own opinions about what's happening rather than just listening to somebody telling you what's going on or how you should be thinking, right? I believe that every one of us in today's day and age needs to be our own analysts, essentially. And on top of that, there are a set of questions that I'm always asking myself as I'm diving through the situation. The first one is, what generally happens in such a scenario, right? So for example, when I did my risk analysis, my map of COVID in real time in March 2020, I actually asked what generally happens during a pandemic, right? And since, the last pandemic, the major one was Spanish flu, I actually asked, hey, what happened then? How many people died? What was, the rates of transmission, all these things. It creates at least a baseline of sorts. But also, again, it's about second order thinking because when we study the past, we're able to start thinking about cause and effect, but not just that, but the next cause and effect, right? So for example, the world is kind of like game theory of sorts. We can basically bet that China is going to be watching this like a hawk regarding how America reacts, how Russia reacts, right? This could also set a precedent essentially for how the Chinese will act down the line. Again, this is second order thinking, right? But we need to have a historical context in order to frame our reasoning. And then what resources to tap into? Who should I listen to? Again, this is kind of the hierarchy of the information sources and which angles, right? Because in a developing emerging crisis, there's always multiple stories that are in parallel going on at the same time. There is the market and economy, there's politics, and then there's also popular sentiment. It's like, which ones do you want to tackle first, right? I think they're all important in their own respects. For me personally, I usually tackle the markets and economy first because the markets essentially are, the stock market especially, is a giant information computation, like computer. It's constantly trying to absorb different information from around the world in order to gauge, hey, build in these expectations and these risks into the prices. So it's an extremely sensitive machine. So I actually like tackling the markets first, but also the popular sentiment is really important because that's what's going to shape politics too at a second order. But yeah, guys, I threw a lot at you, but these are the things that's really going through my head as I'm seeing, as we go into a crisis, right? Or in emerging scenarios, not necessarily a crisis so much as a lot of chaos. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Happy learning. Take care of yourselves out there. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.